This is a Niche Radio podcast. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or log into www.nicheradio.co.za.
Welcome back to SuperDads. We are in the second part of our continuing segment. I decided that we're rather just going to break it up here because, like I said, this interview is very unique, and we're going into details of scientific engineering nature. We're covering some backgrounds about Clive, myself, and we want to break in time for you because this is something you want to listen to over and over again, as well as read the show notes in terms of the documents that Clive has so meticulously put together. And again, breaking up into smaller segments can be a lot easier for you to download the podcast and then listen to the ones that are most relevant to you. So, we both gone to the amenities. We're feeling a bit more refreshed again. So that's great. So, Clive, welcome back. Let's continue with our story here. Any processing thoughts you had in our quick break that you think we need to touch on or navigate to now?
I told you I started forgetting at about 38. That was the time that I was next to that radio tower.
I think also what's unique about the radio tower is that the actual implications of what microwave has on our physiology, which was more properly understood, was only in the late after the 2000s, where there were papers done in astrophysics and cosmology, where they were actually studying the sun, and they saw that before a sun dies, it shrinks and compacts into this very strong. I think it's zinc. It's one of those very strong compact aspects before it explodes and releases high amounts of energy. And what was discovered in that is that you have this thing called transition metals. So, like you mentioned earlier, you used to work in a lab which was copper shielded. And we know we can use aluminium or other metals to shield off microwave radiation very well, using these panels. Yes. However, what those papers in astrophysics and cosmology showed, and this is the same for when they make the motor freeways, and we link it to epidemiology studies, is that they were sprinkling the highways with very fine powdered metals called transition metals. And what happened was they then used microwaves to actually excite them to create this bonding process with the asphalt. And they use a lot of ceramics today. And what these transition metals do is that when they are below 100 nanometers, they actually absorb microwave radiation instead of repel it. Now, those transition metals of smaller than 100 nanometers is actually found in our proteins. It's found in our blood. So, being in the environment like you are now, is that your body is absorbing these microwaves through transition metals in your cells. And then there's a thing called magnetic flux. What that means is, listeners, is that those, like a microwave, how it cooks food in the microwave, it causes things to vibrate and shake more abnormally. And then this generates heat. So, we know we reference ICNIP and WHO EMF project, basically ICNIP division, where they look at the thermal effects and say if it's only above 1 degree Celsius from an external thermal scan. However, in our cells, a small increase actually causes this heating effect and actually dehydrates our cells. And it affects things like the interfacial water. But more importantly, it inhibits us from creating what's called an exclusion zone. Sort of like a protection mechanism, enables water cells to be programmed and to avoid swelling. So when you're not producing that, like you yourself, you document your document. Visually, we can see you're a very inflamed guy. And it's not because, you're a obese, lazy slob. It's because your body is expressing what's called cytokines, or inflammatory response, because your body is entering a state where your cells are hydrophobic instead of hydrophilic. So for our listeners, what that means is our cells are designed to be hydrophilic, meaning that they absorb water. However, in Clive's case, what happens is his cells are actually repelling water. And in his paper, he mentioned something called voltage-gated calcium channels. And what that happens is in our back of our brain, we have something called the paraventricular nucleus. And that's where you have the triggering effect of the stress response and calcium efflux. And that's sort of what the VCGs relates to, is that you're having this abnormal exchange of ions that's happening with the calcium, and you're having severe depletions of magnesium in your body in order to try maintain this mechanism. Now, the thing where magnesium is very critical in this aspect is that magnesium is needed within your cell in order to allow your mitochondria to freely move. So again, mitochondria is related to energy production and having, reprogramming of cells and growth of it. And, that's why you mentioned in your document that when you're exposed, you feel very tired and very lethargic, for quite some time afterwards to recover. And that's because your body is not able to fold and unfold proteins. It's misfolding. So your body's not able to produce this energy, and it's actually having a destruction in your mitochondrial DNA. That's why we mentioned our previous expert, we talked about heteroplasmy rates. So your occupation you had before was causing more damage to your mitochondrial DNA. So, for our listener there, you have two different DNAs. You have a nuclear DNA and mitochondrial. And, we had great work by Dr. Doug Wallace that showed that 95% of diseases out there are epigenetic, meaning that the environment causes this damage on our DNA, and that causes these expressions on our nuclear DNA. So that's where it comes, say, for example, to your late wife who died of cancer. All that cancer basically is this epigenetic expression where the signal called apoptosis is inhibited or disabled. So like we talked about earlier, it's very difficult to rely on these papers because the research become more concrete only very recently. So in 2016 in physics, we had a Nobel Prize award for topology. And what that basically means is a disruption on the surface has huge implications on the bottom. In that same year, we had a Nobel Prize award for apoptosis and autophagy. So what autophagy is sort of the recycling of our mitochondria, or that energy aspect. That's why we exercise, we have more energy and movement. And then apoptosis is what's called cell suicide. Now, normally our cells in our body needs to go through this process, except in our brain. Our brain doesn't really want to kill the cells. So, me, I'm being, say, an 86 kilogram male. My body reproduces its own body weight and more. So let's say 90 something kilos or 100 kilos in mitochondria and cells every single day. So that's what the autophagy process basically does. But for this apoptosis, we found what links between these two papers is that this environmental stimulus, so the blue light, magnetic fields, and especially now the microwave radiation, is being sort of attacking the skin on your body. Now, our skin is our largest organ in our entire body that directly links to our brain. So this stimulation of an artificial sense on your exterior skin, or what's called topology, affects the efficiency rate of autophagy and apoptosis. So what happened with your wife is that because of this continuous strain of before, and then her having the downside from her disease and not be able to kick back, her body went into an epigenetic expression where then she got the cancer in the liver, more particularly, which links to something called deuterium. So basically her mitochondria matrix was breaking down. And that same thing has happened with you with your memory and cognitive dysfunction, is that your body is going into a low oxygen tension environment. It's like you mentioned also in your documents, you have a thing called sleep apnea, or recovering from it. And sleep apnea, it's actually a natural defense mechanism where the body wants to go into this low oxygen state environment in order to slow down electron chain transport. So again, for listeners out there, cancer cells speed up electron chain transport. So that's why, it thrives on sugar. That's why we find people that get cancer become very thin very quickly, because the body doesn't want to eat. So it starts eating on itself to try to get that sugar to keep up, the feeding the cancer cell. And the sleep apnea you have is these different defense mechanisms within your body wants to slow down that electron chain transport, to actually slow down again your heteroplasmy rate, which means to slow down the DNA damage you have in your mitochondria. And that's intuitively why you mentioned also that you like to go to your jacuzzi for frequent periods of time. And interestingly, being in your jacuzzi, one, the water creates a Faraday effect, so it protects you from the microwave radiation in the environment. Number two, the heating effect generates infrared light. And that infrared light actually helps shrink the respiratory protein distance in our mitochondria. So your radiation environment that you experience stretches it out and it makes you have less energy. That red light you've been using is an intuitive effect to help shrink that distance, and actually it enables more efficiency in flowing electrons during electron change transport. So you're trying to use these mechanisms to try balance out the negative effects, because when you speed up electron chain transport, it means we have faster ATPs spin cycle, which means your brain is going to feel more cognitively better because we have a higher oxygen tension environment. You have a stronger magnetic field, which means that you feel less an inflammatory response. So that's sort of like the science techie thing for us, our listeners out there. But it's very interesting, unique how you intuitively went into these actions to try protect yourself and maintain cognitive function during this great deal of difficulty. But yet, as you described in your video recording in the show notes about doing measurements, you have a measuring device, you're measuring areas you're not sure why there's more and not than others. But through your biochemistry observation of science, you're recognizing a pattern, you're describing that pattern. Hence, referencing a lot of your literature based on biochemistry papers, more so instead of the physics ones, which can be trickier and only became more prevalent over the last few years. And it's very difficult to cross-pollinate physics into organic chemistry and biochemistry, which is sort of what my research field does now. So it's tricky for many people, but it's great that you intuitively took this action to bring everything together. And you, like I said, in your narration, you gave it a very easier way for Judge Kasim to actually understand. And I believe he also picked up on that same intuition to empathize with your case based on what you were narrating to him.
I hear what you're saying. I got a slightly different take from all the research that I did. I don't disagree with anything that you've said, but I've got a slightly different take. I'm going to start put together a presentation on how I see the direct effect of cell phone radiation on the body. The way I reduce things down to basics as much as I can in order to get a grasp of how they function, and this has always helped me. We started life as a single cell. Every single cell, a living cell, has a membrane around it, a lipid membrane around it. But because it's enclosed in the skin, it needs to do a couple of functions. One function is it needs to take in food. The other function is it needs to expel waste. And the most important function is it needs to divide and reproduce. Okay? Doing those things means that on the skin on this membrane of each cell, there must be something that opens and closes according to stimuli. Now, it turns out that from what I've read, that the stimuli is basically an electrical signal, a change in concentration of ions, which in turn leads to a difference in voltage. The voltage goes up or down slightly. So these fantastic proteins sit in the skin, and if there is a change in the outside voltage compared to what's inside, it says, oh, I must do the same, I must balance this by opening up a channel, or I must change it the other way by pumping some ions out. Now, it turns out that if you take two cells or a bunch of cells in a group, the way each cell communicates directly with the next cell is it opens up one of these little gates. That's for example, calcium gate, and it changes the concentration of calcium. The next cell sees that, it goes in through the cell, and then it does the same. So this propagation it's called a signal propagation. If you take if you look at each cell as a person, it's one person saying to the next guy, bump him and saying run, and the next guy bumps two of his neighbors and says run. The signal there is a physical bump and a verbal run, whereas with cells, it's a change in ion concentration. Now, this is where the problem with the microwave comes in, is that the microwave is an electrical and a magnetic signal which disturbs these ions, and it disturbs the sensing mechanisms on these proteins on the cell. So what happens is you're getting a cell that's sitting there nice and calm. I'm sitting here nice and relaxed. My cells are all saying, no danger, don't have to get up and run around, just breathe in, breathe out, everything's fine. Along comes the cell irradiation, and suddenly each cell is saying, what was that? Open, close, what signal was that? More ions, less ions? Who's opening up their channels? Why are you opening up your channels? And this confusion is spreading through all the cells. So what that does is, because of these signals, your hormones change, your enzyme levels change, and you get byproducts of these changes. So the byproducts are oxidation reactions. You get oxide radicals. The oxide radicals are destructive to DNA. They are destructive they need it, but they are also destructive. So they have to be cleaned up. One of the things that has helped me a lot is, in reading about that, is that I don't really believe in supplements, but in my case, I need them because I've now got to counteract the fact that they are not, that I'm out of balance with many things. There are two things with me being, specifically with my cellular signaling system and these voltage gated channels, both sodium, calcium, and potassium, and also the enzyme and so on, is that, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Give me a second. Oh yes, the ciprofloxacin, it's chelation of various metals. These metals attach to some of the chemical proteins which regulate these signals. And ciprofloxacin is one that is actually now attaching itself to each one of my regulatory systems and making it unusually sensitive. That's one aspect. And the other aspect was that, so it was, okay. But I'm saying that it comes down to the microwaves interfering with the cellular communication. If you have, every cell has this mechanism, and our nerve cells are elongated cells that open a ionic channel on one end, a electrical impulse travels down and opens up a ionic channel on the other end. These are both being disturbed, and my muscles have been told open, tension, relax, tension, relax, on an extremely fast scale. So I'm getting micro tensions. So I can feel it in my shoulders, is where I feel this tension. I also have problems with exercising, because when I exercise, I build up lactic acid, and that's not been properly disposed of, it's destroying my muscle, it's affecting my muscle, and for 3 days after I exercise, I'm in serious pain. So I'm trying to get around that, and as soon as I can, I will be exercising. I also need to fast in order to drop my weight. Okay.
Yeah, no, yeah. So interesting. So what you've been describing now is in the realm of biochemistry or molecular medicine,
Yes.
where it's focused on the molecules aspect. And the what I found with biochemistry, the downside is that it's more a description of a pattern or symptoms and not actually explanation of why it's happening. So we're having this new sort of more recent field of medicine coming out called submolecular medicine or quantum biology or mitochondrial medicine, where we're using physics to explain the biochemistry. So the simple thing is that we go to a more refined scale. We're using quantum mechanics or thermodynamics. What that means is we focus on electrons and protons. So our mitochondria, our cells, don't actually see food in terms of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. It sees everything as electrons and protons and how it picks it up from the sun. And this inflammation you're talking about here, it's something called the redox potential. So you mentioned earlier how you have multiple chemical sensitivity and also this electrical hypersensitivity. And often people in the literature would say, "Oh, I'm the one and not the other," but actually they're both exactly the same thing. And it comes from having a poor redox. And what that sort of means is that we have these covalent bonds where these electrons and protons have to stick together and have a paired relationship. And it's it's like a waltz dance, is that, when you get married, well, in your case, being married more than once, is that at your marriage dance, there's parts where you separate and you come back together, and you're always in a synchronized time of how you come together. But when someone starts playing, trance and heavy metal music in the background, it becomes disruptive to that waltz pattern. You're not able to find each other again. And that's sort of what the microwave does.
That's an excellent analogy.
Yeah. So you messing up that relationship. And then we have a thing called the breaking of that covalent bond. And that breaking covalent bond, so we don't have a paired electron and a proton, then is what is called a free radical, or its oxidative stress. And that's why people keep thinking they need to buy supplements, and you said intuitively you don't like taking supplements. And what I found, in my research, we're developing treatment protocols for doctors and researching things. Supplements actually a bad thing to do. It detracts when we're doing the development. And we want to also rather focus on improving your redox potential. And when we do that, the chemical sensitivity and the EHS disappear. But a very key thing, and that's why you went to court, is that you cannot get better until you change the environment. And like you said, you have a great passion to want to go exercise again. However, if I was to look, say, at your blood screen at the moment, from my suspicion, is that I would see you in a low redox state, and I actually would completely advise you doing any exercise, because exercise will only make it worse because your body isn't able to metabolize fat at the moment. This is something we're looking at for redesigning the soldier training program for Department of Defense. We're rather by increasing your redox potential. So like you being in a jacuzzi at the moment, I'd actually put you in a cold jacuzzi with ice and something called cold thermogenesis. What we're doing in that is that we're actually increasing the magnetic field in your body. And then it becomes much more effective at utilizing the pairing of those electrons and protons. So that in terms of you doing intermittent fasting, like you said you want to do, the thing is, if you have this radiation stimulus of breaking covalent bonds, even if you intermittently fasting, it's still going to cause your blood glucose to rise up. Like you mentioned in your documents, you're having the high blood pressure problems. You're not diabetic, but you're having the result of insulin resistance that's creeping up here, and it's causing a disruption in your leptin receptor in your brain. But basically, going back to it, is that the reason why we say you have to have a cell phone towered off is that your body is required to interact or communicate with the Earth's natural radiation environment. It's something mentioned in your document about human experiments, and what the Atlas Tower Talcum is saying is that the Ignis studies was taking into account natural radiation. So your body requires to pick that up from the earth in order to do natural biological function. Like, for example, during the day, we have sunlight, we have a low magnetic field. Nighttime, we go to bed, we have a higher earth magnetic field. However, your body is not able to interact what's called the inverse Hall effect to generate an electric field, because it's being disrupted by this heavy metal and rave and trance music playing in the background. So your cells are going in this complete chaos. All your electrons are running away, and you have these protons, which is basically going to a club and having a sausage fest with a whole bunch of, roided up testosterone guys going, fighting the whole time here. And then, your body starts swelling up as a means of trying to create a gravitational field to keep light contained, because your body's emitting excessive light. So that's sort of the struggle.
Could I tell you, I think at this point I should tell you that the reason it is most definitely, the tower is most definitely the cause of my symptoms, is because of something very simple. Since the tower came up, I've had a myriad of symptoms, but confusion, struggling to find words, not being able to type, clumsiness, cognitive issues.
You also mentioned neuropathy from your doctor.
Sorry?
You also mentioned peripheral neuropathy from your doctor.
Yes, I wouldn't, that I would put low on the list. The biggest issue was I was extremely tired and fatigued, and because of the tiredness and fatigue, I'd want to eat to get my energy levels up. Now, in the middle of all of this here, I said, this radiation is scrambling my brain. My wife came to me one morning and said, here, I've made you a radiation shield. She took some aluminium foil and she plonked it around my head. I laughed, but I thought, it might actually work. So I took I have to pretty much take a nap in the afternoon because of the fatigue. And I went and I lay down and I just put this aluminium foil here, and lay down. I had a fantastic 2 hours sleep. But the key was that my dreams were clear. When I say clear, I could see colors, I could see people, I could recognize things. They weren't scrambled, they weren't jumbled, they weren't, it's like, what on earth is going on? And then after the 2 hours, I woke up. After 2 hours, I was energetic, I was rested, and I was not hungry. And keeping myself away from the radiation, my hunger levels are way down, and the fatigue is lessened quite a lot. But my dreams are so different. It is remarkable. So there is no doubt that the radiation from the cell tower is penetrating the outer brain cells and interfering with my thinking.
Yeah, I mean, elaborating on that further, it's not really that the foil is actually blocking the radiation hitting your brain, because from what you explained with your medical data, you're experiencing leaky gut, you're experiencing a permeated blood-brain barrier. So stress responses on your skin is going to...
Could I?
Yes.
What the foil does, aluminium foil or copper foil, is extremely effective at reflecting radiation. It doesn't, when I say block it, it doesn't go through, because it creates a mirror current path, and that reflects the radiation. Now, that means that the front of my head, the top of my head, back of my head, sides of my head have no radiation is able to penetrate. The radiation can come through the front, but I've got my eyes, I've got my sinuses, I've got the jaw, etc. So And by the time it gets through to the brain from the front, it's already very far down. So the foil around my head was very definitely shielding my brain.
Well, interesting how you mentioned the whole thing of it's a reflecting, because it's not just the
Yes.
outside, it's also more important the inside within that foil shield, because your body's emitting infrared light as well as extremely low frequency UVC light. All our cells emit that. So again, the combination of those two is what enables your mitochondrial ATP phase to spin faster. So it enables a recovering and regeneration impact on your cells. So similar to you going to the jacuzzi, your body is using this mechanism of water to help your body become more efficient in terms of like topology. Apoptosis and autophagy become more efficient. The same thing, the foil is enabling internal reflection. So we see this with this, red light therapy on the brain, where they emit red diodes, and that helps very well with Alzheimer's patients and Parkinson's treatment and other neurodegenerative diseases. It's the same, having by looking into a fire, being close to a fireplace, also helps create this regenerative effect. Okay. So what's key here, we want to elaborate more on the science of people, not to think of you as this, crazy alien person putting tinfoil on your head, like, people often get propaganda about, because you're a beautiful science here. And it's not just a thing of, again, you're shielding from one side. And again, like I said, reflecting the radiation externally in a 1, 2, 3, or 4G environment, yes, is helpful. However, when we're in the 4G, 5G environment spectrum, that's what's very key of the argument here, is that they put no limitations on the installation of a cell tower. And already cell towers are employing 5G technology across the country. The moment 5G is properly or installed on your transmitter, I don't know if it's the case already, that aluminium helmet or shielding that you create device actually becomes a magnet for the radiation because of a thing called jump conduction. So that's why we're seeing a lot of the shielding mechanisms for 5G technology greatly changing, where the thing of people wearing these shielding garments that they would wear actually becomes a detriment instead of a repellent for them. So it's again this balance thing of, you might experience I'm cool now, then all of a sudden they upgrade to 5G and you start seeing a whole bunch of different myriad of symptoms of, things are getting worse. I think also you mentioned your document about as some symptoms dissipated, other symptoms started creeping up. And you mentioned earlier about the whole, biochemistry or molecular level of these different chemical signals going in and out. And that's a process called AMPKs. So, when there's other parts of our cells that are being disruptive, our body releases AMPKs, like I said, not knowing going left to right, open, closing, and releases all these chemical signals, and we have all these chemical depletions. Hence your reference to wanting to supplement, because your body is just throwing all these things out, trying to control something.
It's fatigue. I mean, it's like I'm running a marathon without moving a muscle, because
Correct.
it's if somebody, seriously, if I sat in this chair and somebody attached all these electrodes all over me to stimulate my muscles without my brain stimulating them, those muscles are still working hard and producing byproducts, and at the end of a few hours, I would be wrecked.
Yeah, so I mean, so it links to something what's called the vagus nerve in your body. So at the moment, you have a very undeveloped vagus nerve, because you're the whole voltage calcium gated channels. So when we do treatments that actually strengthen or stimulate the vagus nerve, then these other AMPK chemical pathways tend to come under control. Like that's why when I said we put you in the cold, you kind of went, I'm not so sure, but it's a way of training that vagus nerve.
I really have to. The reason I said that was in 1995, I was down in Cape Town, and at the beginning of summer, there's a bay on which is extremely cold. I think the water was like 4 degrees. The beach was packed, and Llandudno. It's Llandudno.
Yes.
beach was packed, but nobody was even putting a toe in. And I said, well, I enjoy swimming. I enjoy the water. And I walk in. I don't just dive in. I just walk in. And when I swim out. I splash around. I do my exercise and so on. And after 20 minutes, I come out. And it's about 4 degrees, I mean, which is pretty cold. And 20 minutes, I come out. Well, I'm bright purple from the blue and the red. And I walk up to my towel. And I hear these... I hear this group of youngsters say, "Bloody show off," and I couldn't care less. I could tolerate the cold. It didn't bother me. I went in, I had a great swim. I came out. I felt stimulated. However, since I've had the ciprofloxacin, going into a mildly warm, a slightly cool pool is like throwing me into a sea of jellyfish. You might as well take needles and razor wire and run it all over me because I am in pain.
So to explain that process for our listeners, so they can understand, okay. At the moment, your health stage you have, your leptin receptor in your brain is dysfunctional. The leptin receptor is what helps. It's like a flight controller for electrons passing through your body and your cells and your system. It monitors and counts out them. Hence you mentioned when you're feeling ill, you just want to eat and eat and eat because your body wants to try get electrons and regulate them. So depending what you actually have, you want to have foods that's very rich in electrons. So normally what we do is we try to work on balancing a person's leptin receptor before we go more into aggressive cold thermogenesis or cold therapy. And also it's very key as because your body having this extreme sensitivity at the moment, it's going to be more sensitive to the skin. This is normal. I mean, we wouldn't put you in, cold 4 degrees water. We'd actually just, first put you with ice on your face in the water, or we just put, 28 degrees water. And over the weeks, we would build you down to, you only need 10 to 12 degrees Celsius water to achieve optimum cold thermogenesis. And you can go colder into that. So it's a process that one would do it. And we do certain breathing techniques. But the idea is that we want to rewire or surgery in your brain to actually have this connection with your cells and your gut and your body. Because as you do it, it starts actually redeveloping new bacteria in your gut. And that again helps your body have a lot more effectiveness and repairing that leaky gut effect that you're having within your body. So that's why we talk about the whole thing of redox potential. The moment you have a very poor redox, and your cells are heavily dehydrated, and this pain you're feeling. So when you go into the cold water, that burning pain sensation is your veins contracting to try keep the heat within your chest and your abdomen area. And the thing is, with you being quite large at the moment, if you do go into cold water, your body is going to convert that white fat into heat only. It's not going to produce more ATP, which means no, repair to your DNA, no more energy. But as you start converting that white fat into something called brown fat is extremely rich in ATP. And that's why then you'll start to feel a lot more energized. You're generating heat and energy at the same time. And what's very nice and noticeable on men is that, as you put on weight, you start developing what we call man boobs. And you have like this hormonal dysplasia where it looks like your nipples look very pointed out and come down. It's not a very appealing thing.
Not there.
But once you actually, when you build this brown fat and your body actually produces more of this sex hormone panel, you naturally build a six-pack and you build an immaculate chest without having to do any weights in the gym. So these are sort of like the physical indicators we see with the protocol of your body improving its redox state. And, going to the gym, it's not Einstein's equations demonstrate that it's not about exercise, not about diet. It's the complete opposite. And, that's sort of what happens in this biochemistry field. Sort of we get misled quite a bit. And that's what's useful and exciting about this whole submolecular medicine of using physics to cross-pollinate to other disciplines. So, that's why we intuitively, like, the hippos, the lions, your dogs outside, they know what to do. They naturally will go out and lie in the sun. They lie on the ground to try, feel better. But, us as humans, we have these annoying things called quantum computers in our brains. And the more we learn, with studying and literature and what one book says or another society, we often learn the wrong thing. We start making these mistakes. And it's very difficult to unlearn what has been learned. So that's, the part of my contract with my research and my scholarship is actually to start to train doctors in South Africa. And, at the end of my contract, to actually start teaching first year and second year medical students in biophysics, because they taught this thing of biochemistry, but they're not taught physics to explain all the linkages. That's why most physicians don't understand this issue or impact of the physics of how EMF has on our cellular biology. And it's going to take time, but a key thing is that's why you employ this precautionary principle in your legislative act, that you only by law need one scientific paper to demonstrate that there's a reason for concern in order for the act to be employed. You did more than one paper. You did multiple organizations and review bodies, which made it all that more impactful, which was highly useful.
It was interesting to get back to the legal aspect. I didn't have to argue the precautionary principle at all, although I put it in. What the judge looked at it this way. He said, he looked at the first part and he said, you weren't notified. It doesn't matter how you did this. No one was notified. You didn't interact with the community. There were problems with the way internally they are supposed to write a memorandum to the decider and not tick the boxes, and that's a constitutional court decision that the reviewer must write a letter, and that wasn't done. They just simply stamped the documents. So he first said that you have a bad approval. Then he said, and that is the way, it's got to be pinned on that. Then he said, you're taking harm. You're medically, you are suffering, and they didn't show. He asked them. He says, where are your scientific papers to show that he has been harmed by something other than your tower? So he was very practical. It was just 2 points. Bad and fraudulent approval process, and number 2, here's a man suffering harm who's going to be driven out of his home, and that's not acceptable. And so he cut it down he saw the points very easily.
So in your opinion, was one more important weighted than the other, or were they sort of on par with each other? What was your interpretation on that?
Yes. They came along and they said, we are going to bring a whole lot of scientific papers to show cause why this order to power down should be vacated. In other words, they're going to say, there is no harm to me, so on. And the judge simply said to them, he said, it doesn't matter. He said, the approval is fraudulent. He says, you're not going to get around that. Your tower is going to come down.
So
he was very blunt with them.
So no, basically, even if they produce conclusive evidence that the radiation is not affecting your health at all, and some other foreign or contaminant agent, the tower would come down anyway because they did not follow civil procedure.
The judge definitely feels that way. However, he was open to the fact that it's not coincidence that they put up a tower and I suddenly start getting a dramatic increase in various symptoms, and I can link them in a certain way. So he could see the causal links. So he's saying, well, you guys, don't quote me the WHO, don't quote me ICNIRP, which they did. He says, show me the scientific evidence that this man is not being harmed. He was very practical.
Yeah, which I think is nice to link to my personal experience as well, where when I approached the High Court, I presented evidence that with my medical records and conjecture and everything else, that there was an associative link and the medical evidence to show it. And it was on the opposing party to present evidence that it was not the case. And I I had a choice to voluntarily subject myself if they wish to do a re-examination or medical tests on me. So I didn't have to do it, but in order to be fairness, I enabled them to do that on me. And it's the same thing. Sorry?
Did you have any positive? Did the medical tests show anything wrong? In other words, you take a blood test and there's a range and a certain value is out of range, or they look at a certain test and they say it's abnormal, it's not normal. Did you have anything like that?
Yeah, I had a number of tests, including CT scans, MRI scans, blood work, psychiatric assessments, cognitive assessments, history, the whole thing. And a very key thing was, and with all this, you have to rule out any other causing agent. So it'd be organic, a virus, or psychiatric. But what happened was with the final state examination of the extreme testing, it was found that I have no psychiatric condition or illness whatsoever, but there was evidence of neurological degradation. So that was, a key final nail in the coffin there. And what I understand the same with your case is that they have to, in order to prove that there's no effect on you whatsoever, they have to request if you wish to volunteer yourself for medical testing. And again, the cost has to be borne by them to prove that, the agent is not causing it on you. And also what's challenging with that is that you can, one, refuse to be, to not undergo the testing, which doesn't always go in your favor if you do that. But two, it also depends on what test they want to subject it to. And even the tests that they do can then be brought into question. So say, for example, like with me as being, contracted agent of the state, the judge should say, okay, these are tests that Clive has been subjected to. Do you feel these tests were adequate enough to rule out, or what other tests should have been done to show that Clive actually is affected by this radiation? And I'd say, well, they didn't do this type of brain scan, or they didn't do this type of blood work, or they didn't interpret the results like this. And, it can make it very tricky and difficult on their side as well. So I think what might be the circumstance, in my opinion, is basically looking at case precedent of other cases internationally. It'll be easier for them to concede that they failed on the evidence of they didn't follow judicial practice, meaning that the judge technically can file criminal charges on them, which wasn't in your order. So therefore, the judge can't do that. However, you can always bring an additional order thereafter. So that's if you filed the Inequality Act, the judge could have then, because you're being prejudiced against your vulnerable health state, he could have ordered the NPA to order criminal charges be laid against them afterwards. But that's not part of your order here.
What would the criminal charges be? Because they simply carried out a business, and the Department of Health has ruled that there's no problem.
Well, again, the Department of Health, we will discuss as a separate thing to it. In terms of criminal, I'm not an expert criminal, but my assumption would be, failure of neglect to follow proper duties, occupational safety, fraud, a number of those kind of aspects on it. So it's them purposely going out of their way to, I guess, cheat the system or not follow due process, and that could potentially put people in harm's way, which is in the case of you being put in harm's way. There's also the Environmental Act in terms of polluter pays principle, where the trees were cut down where they weren't follow procedure. Like actually mentioned earlier, them kicking your fence, them taunting your dogs. Those are all offenses. I guess one can get very stickly with these things, but again, that's at the judge's discretion to put a recommendation.
Okay. Could I ask another question? As you said, degradation of function, of mental function. Somehow I forget what the words your words were.
Neurological degradation. Yeah.
Yes. How did they measure that? Because I've had various tests. I mentioned years ago to a doctor that and again, this is probably the radio tower, that I was seeing a slow decline in my mental capabilities, and I presumed that, well, I'm over 38. I know the exact date it occurred. It's 38, and I've got the reasons for that. But they said, no, we've got to have a baseline. So we need years of tests in which you take year 1, 2, 3, up to 20, and you draw a graph, and the graph goes downwards.
Yeah.
How did they establish that you had neurological impairment or degradation?
Yeah. So in terms of like what South Africa likes to do is they like to do a lot of subjective testing. So even psychiatrists, they prefer to do a subjective assessment and some questionnaires and tricks they do. However, the literature does actually require them to do physical tests as well. So looking at your blood results, pathologies, or those kind of things. In this regard, in my case, the psychiatrist looked at my medical reports, my blood workings from before, and that gave her also a larger picture of it over the course of a number of years. And also, her doing sort of, she called it sneaky observation. So she would observe me, as I came in, I'm saying, I didn't know that she was seeing me. She would see if I was trying to fake things or not. My different court appearances, was there a repetition of accuracy of my degradation, not just me looking like I'm faking things. So those are extensive ways, but from the science and research, there's a lot more better conclusive ways, like doing functional skin tests to test the electrical level from your skin, doing blood pathology tests, and we look at the equations of your cells. So we look at dehydration levels, we look at your melatonin, vitamin D, and all those different other aspects. We also can do a heteroplasmy rate. We can also do an MRI scan to look at your proton shadow zones and where it's occurring in your body. We can do EEGs, ECGs, and so forth, heart arrhythmias, tilt tests. But even with your brain waves, if you have a very docile alpha wave that indicates a very strong additional support to show that you're being affected by the radiation, because normally your alpha wave should be rather erratic and sporadic. But again, the key thing is that all these tests cost a lot of money, and the ordinary man on the street can't always afford them. I was fortunate is that I was in hospital multiple times, and because of my hospital plan, it covered all these extensive weeks and months of me being in hospital and tested for all different sorts of things. I went to the Specialist Eye Institute, I went to this neurologist, that neurologist, and so forth. I mean, I think I got seen by 6 different psychiatrists, and psychologists, and checking all these things. So all these things provided a good pattern. But again, a key thing is going back to your own gut of feeling there's something strange here, trying to research what you can, but not knowing exactly how it all works, which is a detriment to oneself. But I am very happy with now my research being in my position now, being regarded by organs of state of being what they would call me as an expert in the field. I don't see myself as an expert. That's my own personal view. But I do have more of a well-rounded knowledge of how things are connecting. I'm still learning, but that's the viewpoint. And the thing is, South Africa is recognizing that there is need for training.
Okay, if I could ask, my medical tests throughout my life have been abnormally normal. In other words, they all say, I went to the Mayo Institute for a checkup, and they did an extensive checkup. And when the guy looked at the results, he said, my God, I've never seen anybody so normal in my life. He says, normally there's something somewhere that's a problem, and I have excellent genes. Now, the issue is that if all my symptoms are subjective, and when I say subjective, I am saying my thinking is confused, my memory, I have pain, I have nausea. Every symptom that I list as a problem symptom does not have a medical test as far as I know. In other words, they can't put a meter on me and say, oh, your pain level's at 9. They have to ask me, what is your pain level? You follow what I'm saying? How do you determine? There's 2 parts to the question. The first one is, how do you determine that I'm being genuine? How do you determine that, what tests are there to show that I am telling the truth? And second of all, there are people who might be inclined to fake it. How do you tell the difference between a real sufferer like myself, and apart from the fact that I'm prepared to swear on the Bible and any other thing that you say, and that I'm an ethical person, and somebody who might be faking it?
Right, all those questions we are going to elaborate and answer in our next segment.
You're watching the time as I am too.
So listeners, stay tuned. We're going to come back to those answers to those questions that Clive has just posed.
Great. We'll see you in 5 minutes.
For more, visit www.nicheradio.co.za.